Amidst vast fields and towering mountains, there lay a small town where the wind whispered ancient tales, and the creeks murmured eternal secrets. It was in this setting that Michael was born on a night when the stars shone with an unusual intensity, as if the heavens were heralding the arrival of someone special. Yet fate, in its mysterious ways, had decreed that Michael would never know the warmth of a mother's embrace or the security of a father's hand. Orphaned from his first breaths, the boy grew up beneath a roof of utter simplicity, embraced only by the sporadic generosity of the townspeople and the constant, though invisible, presence of a father who transcended the limits of the tangible. The house where Michael was raised was nothing more than a modest stone and wood dwelling on the town's outskirts, where the echo of solitude was his most steadfast companion. The packed earth floor held the footprints of his tentative first steps, silent witnesses to a childhood in which every achievement was celebrated in the quiet recesses of the soul. The rustic walls, weathered by time, were adorned only by slender slivers of light that infiltrated during the day, drawing ephemeral patterns that the boy interpreted as secret messages from a celestial father who was never absent. From an early age, Michael displayed a peculiar sensitivity to perceive the divine in the subtlest details of everyday life. While the other children would rush into their parents' arms at dusk, he would sit on his doorstep and watch the sun set, imagining that the orange hug of the horizon was the welcome his heart so dearly craved. God paints the sky for me every day, he thought, with the innocence and wisdom that only a solitary child can nurture. The absence of a family name never prevented him from recognizing his true heritage. "I am a child of heaven," he replied serenely whenever the other children, in their innocent cruelty, questioned his origins. That answer, far from being an escape from a painful reality, carried the deep certainty that his true bonds went beyond flesh and blood, stretching into the divine that had chosen him for a singular journey. It was Jacob, the town's elder, who first noticed the special light emanating from the eyes of the little orphan. With hands calloused by time and hard work, the old carpenter frequently invited Michael to sit by his side as he worked the wood, transforming raw logs into objects of simple yet profound beauty. "Look, Michael," he would say as his tools carved with precision, "just as I shape this wood, God molds our lives. Even in the hardest and seemingly worthless parts, he sees the beauty that is yet to come." These lessons, imparted amid the scent of sawdust and the rhythmic sound of tools planted in the boy's heart, the first seeds of a faith that, like a sturdy oak, would withstand life's fiercest storms. Jacob not only taught him about carpentry but also shared ancient stories, parables speaking of redemption, unconditional love, and the constant presence of a father who never abandons his children, even when the path seems dark and lonely. As he grew, Michael developed a habit of exploring the countryside on long, solitary walks. On these journeys, the natural world revealed itself to him like an open book, filled with divine messages. The constant renewal of the seasons taught him about the cyclical nature of life. The century-old oak that had survived countless storms spoke to him of resilience and faith, and the creek that found its way through the roughest stones whispered lessons of perseverance. There was one special place, a small clearing in the forest, where the sunlight filtered through the treetops, creating a golden mosaic on the moss-covered ground. There, Michael would kneel and converse with his unseen father, shedding tears born of solitude that mingled with smiles of gratitude. "I know you are here," he murmured, feeling the breeze caress his face as if in silent response. "Even when everyone else has gone, you remain." Michael's childhood, though marked by the absence of constant human warmth, was far from loveless. Mary, the town baker, always reserved an extra slice of freshly baked bread for the boy. "There's no such thing as hard bread for an empty stomach," she would say with a warm smile, as she handed him the still warm loaf, its aroma representing far more than nourishment to Michael. It was the scent of care, the fragrance of divine providence manifested through human hands. The local school, A humble building with a shingled roof and large windows that let in ample natural light became a sanctuary of knowledge for Michael. While other children grumbled about their lessons, he absorbed every word from Mr. Thompson, the teacher, with an insatiable hunger. The books, their pages yellowed with time, transported him beyond the mountains surrounding the town, to distant lands and ancient eras. In the tales of heroes overcoming impossible obstacles, he found echoes of his own solitary journey, reflections mirroring his lonely path that was never truly abandoned. Knowledge, Mr. Thompson would say as he adjusted his worn spectacles on his aquiline nose, is the one treasure no one can steal from you. Michael treasured these words as precious jewels in his heart, instinctively understanding that if the body suffered from material scarcity, the soul could thrive in the abundance of learning and wisdom. Winters in town were particularly challenging. The biting wind descending from the mountains seeped through the gaps in Michael's small cabin, turning nights into tests of endurance. In those moments, when the cold seemed to penetrate to the bone, the boy would wrap himself in his tattered quilt and close his eyes, envisioning a warmth that transcended the physical. In his mind, he saw himself enveloped by strong, loving arms, listening to a deep, gentle voice whisper, "I am here, my child. I always have been." As childhood gave way to adolescence, new challenges arose on Michael's horizon. His body transformed, as did his questions about life and his place in the world. The solitude that had once been a familiar companion at times became an unbearable burden on his emerging shoulders. There were nights when the silence of the cabin seemed to suffocate him, and tears streamed freely down his face, moistening his makeshift pillow. "Why me? Why this life?" he would ask the starlit sky visible through the gaps in the roof. The ensuing silence was not empty but filled with a presence that, although not speaking aloud, imbued the room with a peace beyond human understanding. On such nights of questioning, Michael often fell asleep with an inexplicable sense of comfort, as if unseen hands dried his tears and straightened his quilt over his trembling body. It was during adolescence that Michael experienced one of the most striking moments of his spiritual journey. A fierce storm struck the region, turning the once peaceful stream into a raging torrent that threatened to flood part of the town. The rain fell relentlessly, and lightning split the sky like luminous wounds, followed by thunder that seemed to make the earth shudder. Many townspeople ran to the refuge of the local church, a sturdy stone building perched atop the highest hill in town. Michael, however, noticed a family of newcomers living in a small cabin near the stream. So absorbed in panic, they appeared unable to move. Without hesitation, the young man ran into the pouring rain, guiding them to safety. Once everyone was sheltered, Michael noticed that a small child, the youngest daughter of the family, had disappeared. Ignoring the adults' shouts of caution, he ventured back into the tempest, following an inexplicable instinct that guided him through the darkness and blinding rain. It was then that he found the little girl, clinging to a tree, paralyzed by fear as the water rose around her. "You are not alone," he shouted over the roar of the storm, extending his hand to the child. At that moment, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and Michael swore he saw a radiant presence by his side, an unseen hand that appeared to guide him. With a strength he did not recognize as his own, he managed to carry the child to safety, arriving at the church exhausted, but with a look of unmistakable certainty in his eyes. "It was God who led you to my daughter," the child's mother said between grateful tears. Michael simply smiled, for he knew, with a certainty that defied reason, that he had never truly been alone on that turbulent night. The presence that had accompanied him since childhood had manifested tangibly, confirming what his heart had always known. He was the son of a father who never abandoned him, even in the darkest moments. This episode marked a turning point in Michael's life. News of his courageous act spread throughout town, and people began to see him differently, not as the lonely orphan on the margins of the community, but as someone special, touched by an inexplicable grace. The young man, however, remained humble, attributing any merit to the divine presence that guided him. Upon reaching adulthood, Michael had grown into a man of modest stature whose very presence seemed to fill any space he entered. His deep brown eyes carried a wisdom that belied his youth. His hands, calloused by hard work, moved with a surprising gentleness, especially when comforting the troubled or aiding those in need. Following in Jacob's footsteps, he learned the craft of carpentry, finding in the transformation of wood a parallel to his own life, sculpted by challenges yet always guided by divine hands. His workshop, though simple, became a gathering place for town residents, who came not only to commission furniture or tools, but to seek words of comfort and wisdom that Michael offered almost effortlessly. "How can you be so generous when life has given you so little?" once asked a customer, who observed the dedication with which Michael was working on a crib meant for a poor family. Michael paused his work, looked at his hands marked by hard labor, and replied simply, "I received the most important gift, the certainty that I'm never alone. When you have that, everything else becomes abundance meant to be shared." The solitude that had once been his constant companion had transformed into a meaningful seclusion, a sacred space where communion with the divine occurred in a deep and renewing way. The nights he spent alone in his cabin, now expanded and refurbished by his own hands, were no longer marked by tears of despair, but by intimate conversations with a Father whose manifestations grew ever more evident in his life. His relationship with nature, nurtured since childhood, deepened with maturity. Michael had developed an instinctive knowledge of the region's medicinal plants, a wisdom he generously shared with anyone in need. "Every herb that grows, every flower that blooms, teaches us about healing and renewal," he would say while preparing teas and salves to soothe the suffering of the ill. This connection with the natural world was not merely practical, but deeply spiritual. For Michael, every manifestation of nature, from the most imposing oak to the most delicate wildflower, was a tangible expression of divine love, visible proof that a higher intelligence cared for creation, attending even to the smallest details. It was during one of his forest walks that Michael met Peter, a young shepherd who had lost several sheep during a sudden storm. Desperate and near tears, the young man feared his father's reaction to returning without part of his flock. Moved by instant compassion, Michael offered to help him search, even though the day was drawing to a close. As they ventured into the denser parts of the forest, Michael shared with Peter stories of his own journey, of learning to trust a presence that, though invisible, had revealed itself in crucial moments. The young shepherd listened intently, noticing how Michael seemed to read the signs of the forest. A fallen leaf here, a small tuft of wool caught on a bush there, that guided them toward the lost sheep. When they finally found the animals, cornered in a small ravine, the sun had already set. "How will we get back now?" Peter asked, anxiety evident in his youthful voice. The darkness of the forest seemed impenetrable, and nocturnal sounds began to fill the air with an unsettling symphony. Michael smiled serenely, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "In the same way we arrived here, by trusting that we are not alone on this journey." As if in answer to his words, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a silver glow along the trail that clearly marked the way back to town. During the journey home, with the recovered sheep obediently following behind, Peter regarded Michael with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "You speak of God as if you know him personally," the young shepherd remarked, "as if he were your father." Michael paused for a moment, his eyes reflecting the moon's glow. With a voice imbued with the certainty born of years of profound communion, he answered, "And he is. I lost my earthly parents before I ever truly knew them, but I gained a father who never strays, a father who guides me as surely as we are now leading these sheep home." That conversation under the moonlight marked the beginning of a deep friendship. Peter, impressed by Michael's unwavering wisdom and faith, began visiting his workshop regularly, not only to learn carpentry, but also to ask questions about life, purpose, and the nature of the divine. "I am no sage," Michael would humbly reply whenever the young man called him a mentor. "I have merely been privileged to learn directly from the wellspring of wisdom." As the years passed, the small town witnessed inevitable transformations. New residents arrived with different customs and ideas. Some familiar faces departed, whether in search of better opportunities or to their eternal home. Yet Michael remained, a constant presence, a quiet pillar of strength and wisdom to whom people turned in moments of joy and sorrow. A severe drought struck the region when Michael reached his mid-30s. The once lush fields transformed into barren stretches, where dust danced under the unforgiving sun. The creek, companion to so many of his reflections, dwindled into a meager trickle that barely sustained life around it. Hunger began knocking at the doors of the humblest homes, and fear settled in the hearts of the townspeople like an unwelcome guest. Amid the growing despair, a council formed to decide the next steps. Some advocated abandoning the town in search of more fertile lands. Others called for strict rationing of the remaining supplies. Voices rose in discord, and the unity that had always defined the community threatened to fracture under the weight of adversity. Then Michael, usually reserved in such meetings, stood up. Silence fell over the assembly as he began speaking in a calm voice, laden not with authority from titles or status, but with a deep connection to something far greater. "Our town is not merely a collection of houses or fields," he said, looking into the eyes of everyone present. "It is the home we built together, the ground where we planted not only seeds but memories, dreams, and hopes. Abandoning it would be like forsaking a part of ourselves." Michael's words struck a deep chord in the hearts of those gathered. He continued by sharing his own story, how he had grown up without parents yet never without the feeling of being cared for and guided. "If I, who never had even a family name to call my own, could find abundance amid scarcity, how much more can we, united as one larger family, overcome this challenge?" Inspired by Michael's words, the community found renewed determination. Deeper wells were dug, more efficient irrigation systems were developed, and knowledge about drought-resistant plants was shared among all. Michael worked tirelessly, his skilled hands creating tools that eased the burden of collective labor, while his encouraging words rekindled the hope that had nearly faded. During this challenging period, a figure from the past returned to town. Sophia, a young woman who had left years earlier to study in a big city, now came back as a fully qualified physician, bringing with her valuable knowledge that proved essential to a struggling community. Her return coincided with the town's recovery efforts, and soon she and Michael were working side by side to aid those most affected by the drought. A mutual admiration blossomed between them. Sophia was impressed by Michael's intuitive wisdom, his deep connection with nature, and his ability to find creative solutions with limited resources. Michael, in turn, respected Sophia's formal medical expertise, her tireless dedication to caring for the ill, and her progressive vision that harmoniously complemented the respect for tradition. "How do you manage to keep the faith when everything around you seems to collapse?" Sophia once asked him one evening, as both rested after a long day treating children debilitated by the extreme heat and poor nutrition. Michael gazed up at the starry sky visible through the open window and answered with his characteristic simplicity, "Faith isn't the absence of doubts or fears, Sophia. It is the certainty that even when we walk through the darkest valley, we are never truly alone. It is trusting that, just as these stars keep shining even when clouds hide them from our view, there is a constant presence sustaining, guiding, and loving us unconditionally." His answer deeply moved Sophia. Educated in an academic environment that prized rational thought above all else, she had grown distant from the simple beliefs of her childhood. Yet watching Michael, his inner peace, tireless generosity, and his ability to find beauty and meaning even in the most adverse circumstances, awakened in her a longing for a connection that transcended the intellect and touched the soul. As they worked together, Sophia began to perceive that Michael's approach to healing went beyond the physical symptoms. He cared for the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. His gentle hands not only applied herbal remedies but conveyed a comfort that reached deep into the layers of human suffering. "You have a gift," she remarked as she watched him comfort an elderly man whose physical pain was compounded by the recent loss of his wife. Michael smiled, an expression that lit up his sun-weathered and time-marked face. "It isn't my hands that heal, Sophia. I'm merely a channel for something much greater. When we empty ourselves, we become vessels for the love that truly restores." Gradually, the drought gave way to moderate yet steady rains. The once parched fields began to turn green again. The creek resumed its gentle song among the rocks, and hope, never entirely abandoned, flourished with renewed vigor. The town not only survived the ordeal, but emerged stronger. Its communal bonds deepened, and its appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things renewed. During this time of renewal, the relationship between Michael and Sophia also blossomed, evolving into a love that surprised them both. It was not an overwhelming passion, but a deep, serene affection built on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and shared values. For Michael, who had grown up without the conventional warmth of familial love, this relationship represented a new dimension of divine love manifesting in his life. "I feared that my heart, so accustomed to solitude, would not know how to love another in this way," he confessed to Sophia during a walk along the revitalized creek. "But now I understand that my whole life was preparation for this moment. Every experience of loneliness, every challenge faced, every communion with nature, and the divine, all taught me about love in its many forms." Sophia, touched by the sincerity of his words, replied with equal depth, "You have taught me to rediscover a dimension of life I had neglected in my relentless pursuit of academic knowledge. In your simplicity, I found a wisdom that no book could ever convey. In your faith, a strength that defies rational explanation." Their wedding, celebrated beneath the century-old oak that had witnessed so many moments of Michael's solitary journey, brought the entire community together in a celebration of life, love, and renewal. Jacob, now an elder with completely white hair and unsteady steps, was the first to bless the couple, his trembling hands resting on the newlyweds' heads as he uttered ancestral words of wisdom and blessing. Michael's humble cabin, once a symbol of his loneliness, had transformed into a home where love manifested in everyday kindness, in deep conversations by candlelight, and in the shared commitment to serve the community. Sophia continued her work as a physician, blending modern medical knowledge with the natural wisdom she had absorbed from Michael. Meanwhile, Michael persisted in his carpentry, crafting pieces that carried not only functionality but beauty and meaning. Together, they initiated programs that benefited the town's most vulnerable: reading classes for children, care for the elderly, community gardening projects, and the preservation of traditional medicinal plant knowledge. Their home became an informal center where people of all ages gathered to share stories, seek counsel, or simply enjoy the atmosphere of unconditional acceptance that radiated from the couple. In the years that followed, Michael and Sophia were blessed with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, who grew up enveloped in the love not only of their parents, but of an entire community that embraced them as its own. For Michael, the experience of fatherhood was a revelation, a mirror reflecting his own relationship with the Divine Father who had always guided him. "Now I understand even more deeply," he remarked to Sophia as they watched their children playing under the same starry sky that had once been his only companion during lonely nights. The love of a father for his children does not depend on what they do or achieve. It is unconditional, constant, eternal. It echoes the greater love that sustains all existence. Michael's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined during his solitary childhood. Yet even amid the fullness of his adult life, with a loving family, the respect of the community, and a clear sense of purpose, he never forgot the lessons learned in his darkest moments. Gratitude remained the foundation of his existence, and the awareness of divine presence remained as vivid as in the days when, as a forsaken child, he found solace in the whispers of the wind and the shimmer of the stars. As he grew older, Michael's wisdom deepened along with his ability to see the divine in life's most ordinary circumstances. His hair, now sprinkled with gray, and the lines around his expressive eyes testified to a life rich in experiences, challenges, and joys. His hands, still deft yet marked by decades of labor, continued to create, to heal, to build, and to comfort. Often, young people from town and even distant communities sought him out for guidance, drawn by stories of his unwavering faith and wisdom. Michael received them with the same gentle attention he had once given to Peter so many years ago, listening to their doubts, respecting their questions, and sharing not ready-made answers, but reflections born from his own journey. "The greatest mistake we can make," he would say to these eager seekers, "is to think that we are alone in our struggles, that our pains are incomprehensible, that our burdens are too heavy to bear. The truth I discovered, even in the darkest nights of my life, is that we are never truly alone. There is always a presence, a love that sustains us, a light that even when unseen, continues to shine and guide us home." In his later years, Michael devoted himself to recording the stories and wisdom he had gathered from an extraordinarily ordinary life. Not in formal books or elaborate treatises, but in simple notebooks he filled by candlelight, his careful handwriting reflecting the same attention to detail he applied to his carpentry. These narratives, replete with metaphors drawn from nature and reflections on the divine presence in everyday life, became treasures passed down from generation to generation. "I do not write because I consider myself wise," he explained, to a curious grandson watching over his manuscripts, "but because every life, however simple, contains lessons that can illuminate someone else's path. My story is only one among millions, but if it can help even one person realize they are never truly alone, it will have fulfilled its purpose." It was on a spring morning, as the first golden rays bathed the mountains and the birds' songs heralded the dawn of a new day, that Michael left this world. His body, worn by time but not his spirit, was found in his favorite chair by the window from which he had watched the sunrise every day. A serene smile rested on his lips, as if he had finally come face to face with the Father who had always seemed so near. The funeral drew not only his immediate family and town residents, but people from distant communities whose lives had been touched by Michael's wisdom, generosity, and unwavering faith. Beneath the century-old oak that had witnessed so many significant moments in his life, stories were shared, tears shed, and gratitude expressed for a life that, although begun in profound solitude, blossomed into a legacy of love and inspiration. Sophia, his children, and grandchildren gathered around his grave as the crowd eventually dispersed. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in the same orange hues that had once fascinated Michael during his lonely childhood. Then, the youngest grandchild, a 7-year-old boy with the same piercing eyes as his grandfather, pointed upward. "Look," he said with the typical innocence of youth, "the sky is smiling at Grandpa." Sophia looked up, and for a fleeting moment swore she saw the contours of a tender smile among the clouds. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face, not from sorrow, but from deep understanding. "Your grandpa is finally in the arms of the Father who always guided him," she murmured, embracing the little one tightly. In the years that followed, Michael's handwritten notebooks were compiled and shared not only in town, but across distant communities. His reflections on the divine presence in everyday life, his nature-inspired metaphors, and his wisdom born of adversity touched hearts in unexpected ways. People from various backgrounds and beliefs found in the words of the once lonely carpenter a comfort that transcended doctrines, a fundamental truth resonating in their own souls. The cabin where Michael had spent his lonely childhood was preserved as a simple memorial, not as a shrine to his person, for he had always eschewed any form of idolatry, but to the principles that had guided his life. The place became a pilgrimage, site for those seeking silence, reflection, and the opportunity to connect with something greater than themselves. It was in that cabin that Peter, now an elderly man, would bring his own grandchildren to share the story of the orphan who was never truly alone. "Michael taught me," he would say as the children listened with wide eyes, "that our true family is not determined by the blood running through our veins, but by the love that dwells in our hearts." He never had an earthly father, yet he possessed a connection with the divine so real, so tangible, that it transformed his loneliness into a sacred solitude, a space where the invisible became almost palpable. On stormy days when the wind howled around the town's houses and lightning ripped through the night sky, the elders would recount to the children the tale of how Michael had rescued a little girl during the worst flood the region had ever witnessed. He said he was never alone that night, the elders would relate, that he felt a presence guiding his steps through the darkness and fury of the elements. This story, passed down through generations, became more than a mere tale of heroism. It was a reminder that even amid life's fiercest storms, no one truly walks alone. Michael's legacy lived on, not only in his writings or in the memories of those who knew him, but in the subtle transformation that occurred when someone, inspired by his journey, began to recognize the divine presence in their own life. The forest clearing, that special place where young Michael knelt to converse with his unseen father, became a site of spontaneous pilgrimage. Without any formal organization or signage, people simply found their way there whenever their hearts longed for renewal. They said that in the silence of that space, one could hear the divine whispers more clearly, as if the very earth preserved the memory of the sincere prayers once poured out. Sophia lived for another 10 years after Michael's passing. During that time, she continued the work they had begun together, blending modern medicine with the ancestral wisdom her husband had shared with her. Her final years were devoted to teaching young doctors who came to the town, not only about medicinal plants and healing techniques, but about the importance of treating the patient as a whole being, body, mind, and spirit. Michael never had formal academic training, she would tell these young professionals. Yet he instinctively understood what modern science is only beginning to rediscover, that true healing involves more than medicine and procedures. It involves presence, attentive listening, respect for each person's unique journey, and the understanding that we are more than our physical bodies. When Sophia finally closed her eyes for the last time, she was laid to rest beside Michael, under the century-old oak that had witnessed so many chapters of their intertwined lives. Once again, the community gathered to bid farewell to the woman who, along with the orphaned carpenter, had transformed a small town into a center of healing and wisdom that drew people from afar. Decades passed. The town grew, adapting to the inevitable changes that time brings. New technologies arrived, fresh challenges emerged, and new generations replaced those who had known Michael personally. Yet his story lived on, gradually transforming into a parable carrying essential truths about the human journey. On summer nights when the stars shone with an exceptional brilliance over the town, the elders would gather the children beneath the majestic oak, now more imposing than ever, and retell the story of the boy who grew up without earthly parents, yet never without the love of a heavenly father. "Look at the stars," they would say, pointing to the night sky. "Even when clouds hide them, they remain. So is the divine presence in our lives, constant, eternal, unshakable, even when our eyes cannot see it." And as the children gazed upward in wonder, many felt an inexplicable connection with that long-ago orphan who had transformed his isolation into a testament of divine love. In their young hearts, the essential message of Michael's life took root. No one, however lonely their journey may seem, is ever truly alone. There is always an unseen presence walking alongside us, guiding, protecting, and loving unconditionally, like a father who never abandons his children, even when the path is dark and the destination uncertain. Thus, the legacy of the orphan who grew up alone, yet was never truly alone, continued to blossom, not in grand monuments or formal institutions, but in the hearts of those who, inspired by his story, began to perceive the divine presence in their own lives. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of Michael's existence, that a life born of abandonment and scarcity could transform into an inexhaustible fountain of hope, faith and love for generations to come.